This is a remarkable story from the Vietnam War, one that offers a powerful lesson in strategy technology and the human element of combat. It may be less known than others, but it is no less significant. It involves one of America's most advanced aircraft, the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, and one of its most distinguished officers. The skies over Vietnam were a proving ground where two military superpowers tested their latest hardware and tactics against one another. It was in this high-stakes environment that some of the most compelling narratives of modern air combat were written. This particular story centers on a truly distinguished officer, Brigadier General Norman Gaddis. For those who may not know his name, General Gaddis, who passed away in 2023 at the age of 100, had a long and storied career. He entered the Army Air Forces in 1942 and became a seasoned pilot, flying a wide range of iconic aircraft from the P-40 and P-51 during World War II to the F-86 Sabre and the supersonic F-100 Super Sabre. With his immense experience, General Gaddis became a leading authority on air combat tactics. By the 1960s, he was the dean of the Air Command and Staff College, where he specialized in a critical subject, teaching American pilots how to counter Soviet-made MiG fighters effectively. To understand the context, we need to look at the aircraft involved. On paper, the matchup seemed decidedly one-sided. The MiG-17, a Soviet design from the early 1950s, was a nimble subsonic fighter armed only with cannons. It represented an older generation of jet technology. The F-4 Phantom II, introduced in the early 1960s, was a technological marvel. It was a large, powerful fighter-bomber that could fly at over twice the speed of sound and carried a formidable arsenal of air-to-air guided missiles. It was designed to detect and destroy enemy aircraft from a distance well beyond visual range. To fully appreciate its impact, it is useful to compare the F-4 Phantom II to its contemporaries. When considering the F-4 Phantom II against other aircraft of its era, such as the F-8 Crusader F-11 Tiger and the de Havilland Sea Vixen, several distinctions set the Phantom apart. First, the Phantom II brought genuine supersonic capability in straight and level flight, a considerable leap over contemporaries like the Sea Vixen, which, while agile at certain altitudes, simply couldn't match the Phantom's raw speed and climbing power. Where the F-8 Crusader and F-11 Tiger excelled in maneuverability and had strong followings within the Navy, the Phantom's twin engines delivered thrust and acceleration that eclipsed those of single-engine rivals, making it one of the fastest fighters of its time. One of the most transformative elements was the Phantom's tandem two-seat cockpit. Unlike the Sea Vixen's side-by-side layout or the single-seat design of the F-8 and F-11, the Phantom's approach offered the pilot and radar intercept officer unparalleled visibility and teamwork. Having two trained eyes with advanced radar substantially improved situational awareness in fast-moving intercepts and combat, a significant tactical advantage over its peers. While some earlier models like the Vixen held an edge in tight turns at altitude, the Phantom II more than compensated with its versatile payload, advanced weapon systems, and superior stability for carrier operations. Its design allowed it to carry a heavier weapons load, integrate cutting-edge avionics, and adapt seamlessly to different tactical roles, from high-speed interception to ground attack missions. In essence, the F-4 Phantom II marked a pronounced advancement over its contemporaries, combining speed, adaptability, and technical sophistication. These attributes not only ensured its dominance during its operational peak, but also paved the way for the next generation of supersonic fighter aircraft. General Gaddis was understandably concerned when these technologically superior American aircraft were being lost to the older MiGs. He believed American pilots were not fully leveraging the F-4's advantages and meticulously outlined the MiG-17's weaknesses, developing strategies to overcome them. As losses continued, the Pentagon tasked General Gaddis with a critical mission. In November 1966, he was sent to Vietnam to assess American air tactics firsthand and to develop a more effective strategy for dealing with North Vietnam's air defenses, especially their determined MiG pilots. After months of research, he was nearly ready to present his findings. He decided to fly one more combat mission to gather final real-world data. This is where the story presents a fascinating contrast in experience. In aviation, a pilot's skill is often measured by flight hours. A pilot with under 300 hours was sometimes informally known as a no-number pilot, signifying their relative inexperience. General Gaddis, with over 200 hours, was an exceptionally experienced aviator, a super ace by any standard. The North Vietnamese pilot he would encounter that day was Lieutenant Ngo Duc Mai. By contrast, Lieutenant Mai had accumulated just under 300 flight hours. He was flying a MiG-17, an aircraft considered outmatched by the F-4 Phantom that General Gaddis was flying. On May 12, 1967, a large-scale air engagement took place. A force of American F-105s and F-4s with General Gaddis helping to command the F-4 flight engaged a group of North Vietnamese MiGs. The sky became a chaotic theater of high-speed maneuvers with missiles and cannon fire exchanged between the adversaries. Amid the swirling dogfight, Lieutenant Mai saw an opportunity. As General Gaddis's F-4 emerged from a cloud, Mai skillfully maneuvered his more agile MiG-17 into a classic pursuit position directly behind the Phantom. At this close range, the F-4's long-range missile advantage was negated and the MiG-17's cannons became lethal. Lieutenant Mai opened fire and his cannon shells found their mark. The F-4 Phantom serial number 637614 was critically damaged. General Gaddis and his backseater were forced to eject and were subsequently captured after landing in North Vietnamese territory. In a remarkable postscript to the event, General Gaddis later requested to meet the pilot who had bested him. During their meeting, Lieutenant Mai explained the North Vietnamese tactic: grab the enemy by his belt to fight him. The strategy was to nullify the enemy's technological superiority by getting in extremely close, where maneuverability and pilot skill in a gunfight became the deciding factors. For General Gaddis, it was a profound first-hand lesson. The encounter highlighted a timeless principle of warfare that strategy, courage, and a deep understanding of one's strengths can overcome a significant technological disadvantage. It was a lesson that would go on to influence American air combat training for years to come. Life is full of surprises. A Phantom being shot down by a weaker opponent like a MiG is also possible. However, to understand how the supposedly superior aircraft could lose, we must move beyond the spec sheets and dissect the very essence of how each machine was designed to fight and how the realities of combat in Southeast Asia turned a theoretical advantage into a practical liability. To understand the F-4, one must understand the mindset of its creators in the late 1950s. The future of air combat, they believed, was beyond visual range. The era of the swirling close-in dogfight was replaced by high-speed, high-altitude interceptions guided by powerful radar and lethal guided missiles. The F-4 Phantom was the physical embodiment of this philosophy. Its greatest strength was its raw power and advanced technology. The Phantom's two General Electric J79 engines produced a staggering amount of thrust, pushing the large airframe to incredible speeds and allowing it to climb like a rocket. This gave it a massive energy advantage over almost any other aircraft in the sky. It could dictate the terms of an engagement by choosing when and where to fight, using its speed to engage or disengage at will. Coupled with this power was a sophisticated radar system which in theory allowed its two-man crew, a pilot and a radar intercept officer or RIO, to detect, track and target an enemy from dozens of miles away. The intended kill hypothesis for the F-4 was clean, efficient, and distant. An F-4 on patrol would detect an incoming MiG on its radar long before the MiG pilot knew it was there. The RIO would acquire a lock and the pilot would launch an AIM-7 Sparrow radar-guided missile. The missile would fly to the target, destroy the enemy, and the F-4 would turn for home, its crew never having laid eyes on their opponent. For closer encounters, it carried the AIM-9 Sidewinder, an infrared-guided missile that homed in on the heat of an enemy's engine. This doctrine led to a fateful design decision. Early models of the F-4, including the F-4C and F-4D, used extensively in Vietnam, had no internal cannon. A gun was seen as an obsolete relic of a bygone era. Why engage in a messy, close-range gunfight when you could kill your enemy from miles away with a push of a button? This assumption would prove to be one of the most critical miscalculations of the war. The Phantom's weaknesses were the direct inverse of its strengths. It was huge and heavy, weighing nearly twice as much as a MiG-17. This meant it had a large turning radius and could not sustain tight, high-G maneuvers without bleeding precious airspeed and energy. Furthermore, its J-79 engines, for all their power, produced thick black smoke trails, making the F-4 tragically easy to spot from miles away, often nullifying the element of surprise its radar was supposed to provide. Finally, the early air-to-air missiles, the cornerstones of its fighting philosophy, were notoriously unreliable. They required very specific launch parameters, were easily confused by clouds or ground clutter, and had a high failure rate. How about MiG-17? The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17 Fresco was a product of a different time and a different philosophy. It was designed as a point defense interceptor, a simple, rugged, and incredibly agile aircraft meant to rise quickly to defend a specific area from attacking bombers. It wasn't built for speed or high-tech long-range combat, it was built for a close-in brawl. The MiG-17's greatest asset was its phenomenal maneuverability at low and medium altitudes and subsonic speeds. Its small-sized, lightweight, and wing design allowed it to turn on a dime. Its instantaneous turn rate was far superior to the F-4's. While a Phantom pilot had to manage a wide sweeping turn, a MiG-17 pilot could whip his aircraft around in a tight circle, getting his nose and his guns pointed at an enemy in seconds. Its armament consisted of powerful cannons, typically 137mm and 223mm cannons. These weapons were unsophisticated compared to guided missiles, but they were brutally effective and reliable. They didn't need a radar lock, weren't confused by flares, and once a pilot was in range and had a target in his sights, they worked every time. The kill hypothesis for the North Vietnamese MiG-17 pilot was therefore the polar opposite of the F-4's. It relied on ambush and forcing the fight into a domain where the Phantom was weakest. Aided by excellent ground-controlled intercept operators who used ground-based radar to act as the eyes for the MiG pilots, they would be vectored into an advantageous position, often hiding at low altitudes to ambush the Phantoms from below or behind where the F-4 crew's visibility was poor. Their goal was to survive the initial missile attack, close the distance, and draw the F-4 into a slow-turning fight, a knife fight in a phone booth. Once inside the Phantom's turning circle, the MiG-17 pilot could use his superior agility to get on the F-4's 6 o'clock tail and bring his devastating cannons to bear. When these two philosophies collided over the skies of Vietnam, the results were often determined not by technology, but by the rules of the game and the nature of the battlefield. First and foremost were the rules of engagement. For much of the war, American pilots were required to visually identify a target as hostile before they were permitted to fire. This single rule completely shattered the F-4's primary BVR doctrine. A pilot couldn't launch his Sparrow missile from 20 miles away. He had to fly close enough to see the enemy aircraft, confirming it was a MiG and not a friendly plane or a civilian airliner. By closing to visual range, the F-4 pilot willingly sacrificed his greatest advantage and entered the MiG-17's preferred arena. Second, the human and environmental factors played a huge role. The North Vietnamese GCI controllers were the unseen third combatant in every fight. They provided MiG pilots with a level of situational awareness that the F-4 crews operating far from home often lacked. The hazy tropical skies of Vietnam also made spotting the small MiGs difficult, while the Phantom smoke trails made it an easy target to find. These combat limitations were compounded by other serious threats that F-4 crews had to face on every mission. Despite the F-4 Phantom II's impressive capabilities, its crews operated in one of the most dangerous and dynamic aerial environments of the era. Two primary threats loomed over every mission: the ever-present danger of surface-to-air missiles and the growing challenge posed by nimble MiG-21 fighters. As U.S. air operations intensified, North Vietnamese forces equipped with Soviet-built SAMs transformed the skies into a gauntlet of hidden dangers. These radar-guided missiles were notorious for their unpredictable trajectories. Pilots recount how a SAM would launch from the ground and lead the target, forcing crews into split-second evasive maneuvers to avoid being caught in a lethal explosion. Even if a missile missed a direct hit, the detonation could scatter shrapnel at supersonic speeds, damaging aircraft and wounding crew members. Phantom II pilots engaged in high-speed, low-altitude tactics and coordinated suppression missions, famously known as Wild Weasel operations, to hunt and neutralize enemy SAM sites, often braving intense ground fire. By the late 1960s, F-4 crews began encountering the agile Soviet-supplied MiG-21, a lightweight interceptor that posed a formidable challenge. While the Phantom boasted superior speed, radar, and missile technology on paper, real-world combat revealed critical weaknesses. Strict rules of engagement required pilots to visually identify enemy aircraft before firing, often forcing them into close-range dogfights for which the Phantom's size and lack of agility were disadvantages. The MiG-21's smaller frame and quick maneuvers could outflank the heavier F-4, and the Phantom's smoke-trailing engines made it easier to spot from afar. To make matters worse, early F-4 models lacked an internal cannon for short-range fights, leaving pilots reliant on often unreliable missiles until the F-4E variant finally added a nose-mounted gun. Day after day, F-4 crews had to balance technological strengths and tactical innovation against these adaptive lethal threats. Despite these challenges, their resilience training and evolving tactics allowed the Phantom II to remain a dominant force throughout the conflict. Beyond the threats from enemy aircraft and missiles, the operational environment itself presented life-threatening challenges, particularly the hazardous task of in-flight refueling, which was essential for long-range missions. Refueling in flight made long-distance flying operations possible in Southeast Asia. Heavily laden aircraft like the F-105, Thunder Chief, F-4 Phantom, and B-52 Stratofortress needed fuel on the way to and from their targets. Getting gas from tankers allowed them to carry maximum bomb loads, and search and rescue helicopters increased their range with air refueling as well. In-flight refueling depended on precise timing and navigation. Bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance aircraft were carefully scheduled to meet tankers at given times and places. Refueling fighter and reconnaissance planes near combat zones was complicated. Several meeting areas called anchors over Thailand, Laos, South Vietnam, and the Gulf of Tonkin were set up so fighters could select the nearest airborne gas station on the way to and from their targets. Sometimes 50 or more aircraft met and circled over a wide area as fuel changed hands. Tankers often overflew hostile territory to meet and fuel planes that otherwise would not have made it home. Many pilots owed the success of their missions, and some owed their lives to being refueled by tankers. One particular incident vividly illustrates these dangers. On a dark and stormy night in Ubon, Thailand in 1969, a flight of 3 F-4 Phantoms call sign Killer was waiting to take off on a mission over northern Laos. The flight leader was then Captain Luke Graves, a fighter pilot who flew 177 combat sorties in North Vietnam and northern Laos between 1968 and 1969. He flew the F-4D while serving in the Wolfpack, the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing. The weather was Delta Sierra with heavy thunderstorms all around the theater. I'll never forget that the water was up to my ankles on the ramp as I was trying to pre-flight my aircraft, said Graves. The mission was planned for an afternoon takeoff, but the TOT kept getting slipped because of the weather. Finally, at 11 p.m., they got the go-ahead to take off. They had expected to fly during the day, but now it was a night mission and the theater was still full of thunderstorms. They were tasked to take out an anti-aircraft site at a place called the Bird's Head near the border of North Vietnam and Laos. The flight plan was to fly towards the target, refuel on a tanker, and then hit the target. They immediately hit a huge wall of thunderstorms, and Graves put them on a 3-mile radar trail to punch through the line of thunderstorms. Upon finally getting through, they called up ground control to get a slot with the tanker and were told that the 3 tankers, Cherry Peach and Lemon, had to move back to a relatively small area because of the weather, and that they were commingled in a relatively small area. Killer Flight of 3 then went back through the line of heavy cells and came up on the tanker channel, only to hear all 3 of the tankers jammed up in this small area arguing about who was supposed to be at which altitude. With several other attack flights needing to refuel, it was becoming a dangerous situation with these 3 tankers bunched up in this small area. Finally, they got onto Cherry Anchor for refueling. The flight of 3 F-4s and the tanker continued banking around the storms while refueling when suddenly the tanker flew them directly into a heavy storm cell. Graves had just refueled and was in the pre-contact position when they hit the storm. He immediately called a lost wingman maneuver, signaling his wingmen to peel left and right respectively. With limited choices of where to go, Graves rolled upside down while under the tanker to get separation. Flying upside down underneath a tanker while in a thunderstorm on instruments with a full fuel and bomb load was a once-in-a-lifetime thriller, said Graves. No one collided and they managed to regroup and get tanked up before heading off to the target, which was of course surrounded by thunderstorms. They finally found a hole and dove into the target. Because of all of the lighting, the gunners spotted them and let loose. They were committed, so there was no other choice than to fly into the barrage and hit the target. It felt like we were diving into a volcano and reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe's story, Descent into the Maelstrom. Luckily, no one was hit, but with all the thunderstorms around them, there was nowhere to go, so Graves made a snap decision and took them down to the deck instead of up and out. The problem is that this area is full of mountains and karsts, so flying low at night isn't normally an option. Finally, they found a hole and popped back up to cruising altitude. At this point, the three crews were a bit rattled by this crazy mission. When they checked in with Wolfpack, they were told that Ubon was socked in and instructed to fly back through the same thunderstorms to refuel again and await further instructions. Graves, who was strung out from an adrenaline hit, asked his backseater to take the controls and fly them into Udorn instead of Ubon, which was still open. I figured we had filled our bravery square for the night, so I just took us to Udorn and bought the boys a drink. During its service in the Vietnam War as the primary fighter bomber of the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, the F-4 Phantom was not always a loser. It also shot down many MiGs. The F-4 story does not end in Vietnam. It will continue its story in the Middle East in the hands of Israeli pilots. Before focusing on its service in a specific nation, it's important to recognize the Phantom's vast operational history and global reach. The operational history of the F-4 Phantom II is marked by its extensive use in crucial military campaigns and its role as the primary air superiority fighter for U.S. military branches during the Vietnam War. The aircraft played a pivotal role in air-to-air combat, showcasing its effectiveness against enemy fighters and its adaptability in various combat scenarios. With over 195 units built, the F-4 Phantom II holds the record as the top American supersonic military aircraft in production history. Throughout its service, the F-4 Phantom II was produced in numerous variants tailored for different operational requirements, including adaptations for both the U.S. Navy and Air Force. This versatility allowed the Phantom to excel in various roles from air superiority missions to ground attack and reconnaissance operations. Its combat service spanned several decades, making it a cornerstone of U.S. military aviation and a symbol of air power during the Navy and Marine Corps Cold War era. Following its notable performance in the Vietnam War, the F-4 Phantom II continued to play a significant role in various international conflicts and with numerous air forces around the world. Throughout the Cold War and well into the 21st century, the Phantom was a familiar presence in the sky stretching across multiple continents. The F-4 Phantom's impact extended far beyond the Vietnam War, as it was adopted by several countries and served in diverse roles across multiple air forces. The German Air Force operated the Phantom from 1971 until its retirement in 2013, showcasing the aircraft's adaptability and longevity in various air forces. The Phantom II's versatility allowed it to perform both combat and reconnaissance missions, reflecting its capability to meet different operational requirements. Many nations, including Greece, Turkey, and South Korea, integrated the F-4 Phantom into their air forces, leveraging its advanced avionics and weapon systems to enhance their military capabilities. The aircraft's ability to adapt to different roles and environments made it a valuable asset on the global stage. Its service with foreign air forces further demonstrated its reliability and effectiveness in various combat scenarios. The F-4 Phantom II's global service record underscores its significance in military aviation history. As the most produced supersonic fighter in history, the Phantom's legacy continues through its operational history and its continued use by several countries. Its widespread adoption and versatility in different roles highlight its enduring impact on military aviation worldwide. After the Vietnam War, the Phantom II was extensively used by the Royal Air Force, particularly along the border with East Germany during the tense decades of the Cold War. Its roles ranged from ground attack to reconnaissance, underscoring the adaptability that had become a hallmark of the aircraft. In the aftermath of the Falklands conflict, British Phantoms were deployed to the Falkland Islands to strengthen air defense serving there throughout the 1980s. Several nations, including Germany, Japan, Australia, and Egypt, not only adopted the Phantom II, but also deployed it in active service during regional tensions and engagements. In the Middle East, Israeli Phantoms saw repeated use in combat operations from the 1970s through the early 1980s. More recently, countries such as Turkey have flown their F-4s in the fight against modern threats. For example, Turkish Phantoms executed airstrikes against ISIS targets in Iraq in 2014. Remarkably, despite the introduction of cutting-edge fighter aircraft such as the F-15 Eagle, the Phantom II remains in limited operational use in some nations. Its enduring presence nearly 7 decades after its introduction attests to its robust design and the pivotal roles it has played in both historic and contemporary military aviation. Despite the ability of the American-manufactured F-4 to perform both the air-to-ground and air-to-air roles with equal success, the Israeli Air Force's reliance on the Mirage 3 and Nesher Delta fighters meant that the Phantom II was used most regularly in its air-to-ground role. Nevertheless, during the Yom Kippur War, the IAF F-4s were also used as fighters. The second IAF unit to receive the Kurnas as the Israeli Air Force called the Phantom was the 69 Squadron Hammers that widely used its F-4s for the first time in combat during the so-called Operation Blossom, a series of missions that targeted headquarters, logistics centers, and training facilities all over Egypt to persuade the country to abandon the attrition war policy. The 69 Squadron gained its first ever air-to-air kill on February 8, 1970. Following a strike against a logistic facility at Helwan, a pair of MiG-21s took off to pursue a pair of Kurnas flown by Avihu Ben Nun with Achikar Eyal and Aviam Sela with Shabtai Ben Shoa. The story of how Aviam Sela came to find himself in the right place and at the right moment to shoot down the first enemy fighter in the Hammer's history is very interesting. According to Sela, the story began circa 1968 when he was planning for conversion to the Mirage, but he had already realized that flying was not enough. He initiated academic studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem immediately after the Six-Day War. The Mirage conversion course was at Ramat David, and the implication was that he would have had to discontinue his studies, so he turned down the offer. A fighter pilot turning down an offer for Mirage conversion was an unheard-of event, and Sela was summoned by the IAF commander. The general attitude at the time was that a pilot did not need to study any further than what was required in flight training. Sela insisted upon studying, renouncing the opportunity to fly the Mirage, and for this reason he was later assigned to 69 Squadron. While Aviam Sela continued his studies, the IAF purchased the Kurnas and 69 Squadron was reactivated. The result of this was that Sela flew combat missions during the War of Attrition while also attending his academic lessons. Serving as deputy commander, he would return from missions over Egypt 3 or 4 times a week, flying at low altitude over Haifa to inform his lecturers that he would soon attend their lessons. He would then land at Ramat David, and an hour later he would be sitting in class at Haifa. Sela attended his first Kurnas conversion course at Hatzor and was then assigned to 69 Squadron. He flew his first Kurnas mission on December 25, 1969, when with slightly more than 30 flying hours on the type he attacked a SAM battery. He had only 20 more hours in the aircraft when he shot down the first MiG in 69 Squadron's history. The dogfight took place in February 1970. According to his recollection, he was not even sure if he had practiced air-to-air gunnery before that combat. He launched the first air-to-air missile, but it was the wrong one as he had confused the switches. Instead of a heat-seeking missile, he launched a semi-active radar homing missile. He then launched a second missile beyond its effective range. At that point, he had only flown about 50 hours in the Kurnas and hardly knew the cockpit. Luckily for him, the Egyptian pilot flew slowly over the Nile Delta and was patient enough for Sela to make every possible error before he was finally shot down. Sela managed to get into cannon range and succeeded in downing the MiG during his 7th cannon burst. In that single sortie, he effectively completed his air-to-air training and made history. He scored the first ever gun kill for an Israeli F-4, as well as the first air-to-air kill in the history of 69 Squadron. Moreover, once the War of Attrition ended, Sela finally got 9 months of leave to finish his studies. Another key international operator of the Phantom was Great Britain, where the aircraft played a crucial role for both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force for decades. The F-4 Phantom II's journey to British military service began as a practical solution after the cancellation of the ambitious TSR-2 Strike aircraft program. Initially met with skepticism by British defense officials who famously joked about its unconventional appearance, the Phantom was ultimately selected to fill the urgent gap in the Royal Navy's fleet. Specially modified British variants designated as FGR joined the Fleet Air Arm in 1968, playing a central role in defending aircraft carriers such as HMS Ark Royal. The Royal Air Force soon followed suit, deploying the FGR-1T's variant from 1969. RAF Phantoms were stationed in West Germany, where they undertook vital ground attack and reconnaissance missions along the tense borders with Eastern Europe. The Phantom's versatility proved equally valuable in the South Atlantic. Following the Falklands War, British Phantoms were dispatched to the islands to bolster air defense between 1982 and 1985. Across these diverse environments on carrier decks in Central Europe and over remote island outposts, the F-4 Phantom II adapted seamlessly to the unique demands of British service, reinforcing its reputation as a flexible, reliable, and enduring frontline fighter.